My name is Colten Goertz. I'm an MPP student, and my research topic is the Canada Health Transfer. My project was first looking at the institutions of our country in terms of how the federal government transfers money to the provinces through the Canada Health Transfer. So my study was trying to compare the institutions that we have to institutions used in other countries, i.e. Australia. So that's the country I used. So what I did was try to find a method in terms of how to compare these two, because what I found in the comparative literature, it's simply a series of this is similar, this is dissimilar. Take from that what you will. And I wasn't satisfied with that. I was looking for what specific aspects of these programs are important for us to draw lessons from. So that was really the comparative lesson for me, is drawing from the experiences of this country. I chose this method because it conformed to my research question. My research question was, is it possible for Canada to adopt this approach? So trying to answer that by looking at another country and how they do it. How did they implement what they have today? So trying to find sort of a step-by-step way of how is it possible for policymakers to adopt this method. And I found this comparative method by Richard Rose was just excellent. He provided a very step-by-step guide of what you should do, what you should do. You should first fully understand what you're going to start by comparing. You not only understand the other thing that you're comparing, but your first organization, to make sure that you understand your first topic so that you're not comparing apples to oranges, you are indeed comparing apples to apples. So then then you go abroad and go and find that other program and compare the two together. In terms of finding the appropriate literature, I was going to the organizations itself. They were very good at explaining what it is that they do. As far as a bare bones model, what I'd have to do was to go into the greater academic literature to sort of understand why that organization is doing what it's doing in sort of the greater policy or economic context of why this decision was made. Because an institution will say, we decided to do this on this date, but they don't specifically say, well, why? What spurred? What was the outside factor that happened? Nothing happens in a vacuum. I think that when anybody does research and they go into the literature, they'll encounter something that they didn't expect. And I think what's important to do is to look into the literature and don't expect a result. Don't go in there saying, I know the answer to the question already. Let the literature and let the data speak for itself, and then extrapolate from that your answer. And I think that was certainly a roadblock for me, going into it having this assumption that this is what I'm going to find, but in fact that's not what you find, and then you have to work your way back to a better conclusion. I would definitely say that interviews and relying on policy experts in the area is incredibly important. First, of course, look into the literature, try to gain an understanding of the program itself in doing what you're comparing, but to get an even deeper understanding, talk to the people who actually work in that field and get an understanding from them, to not only to hopefully confirm what you already know, but to hopefully clarify any little cracks that exist within that area. I think that's common practice even in many government organizations. If you have a policy problem or a perceived policy problem, you will look to others who have encountered those same problems and solved it. So you go to them, you ask them what they did, how they did it, etc., and then return home to go, okay, will their method apply here? Will it work here? If yes, then you can adopt it. If not, which is sometimes the case, because two things aren't exactly alike and two contexts may not necessarily coincide, so it may not work. But it's a good way of finding out if something could be changed. It's important to be able to draw solutions out because of best practices, to be able to find somebody else or some other organization that has encountered these exact same problems and see how they deal with it. You don't necessarily have to draw positive lessons. You could draw negative lessons too. If somebody did something and failed miserably at it, you could go, okay, well then we shouldn't be doing that, because that just might hurt us. So you seek both positive and negative outcomes. I think the background that one would have in terms of their approach to studying this really depends on what field they're looking into. So if you're trying to change an economic policy, it would certainly benefit you if you had a background in economics. But if you don't, then I would strongly suggest before diving into that, get a little basics on how these programs work in terms of economics, in terms of politics, etc. And I certainly had to do that. I don't have a background in economics, so before I could actually understand even the system that works in Canada, before even going to Australia, I had to understand the very fundamental basics of how this works in terms of economics. So that's incredibly important. So you need that basis, and the literature is out there. It just takes a little time. I would say this method is certainly useful in academics, but it also translates well into the policy world. That would be my assessment. I think my favorite part of this entire process of using this method was definitely the learning experience and finding out this information, being able to look at another policy program and how it works, and to be able to relate that back to our own program and go, oh, this works differently there. This could work better here. Perhaps that's something we can learn from. Or in the opposite sense, learning from what happens over there and going, that may not necessarily work here. This is way, way, way too different and way too unapplicable given our current status.